What's cracking, guys? Omar Isaf here, back with another video. In this video today, I got a special guest, Dr. Mike Israetel. You guys asked for it, you got it. All about programming when it comes to hypertrophy. 5 rules for muscle building. We listen to you guys, it's a little bit more conversational. He has a guest that's going to talk all about that. If you like this video, you want to see more, make sure to like the damn video. Sit down, it's a little bit longer, but I guarantee it'll be totally worth it. In the comment section below, just leave a comment what muscle group you want to see Dr. Mike Israetel talk about specifically when it comes to programming, when it comes to size, rep ranges. Comment below, we'll make it happen. Without further ado, I'll let Mike do all the talking.
Hey guys, Dr. Mike Israetel and Jared Feather here from Renaissance Periodization, and thank you so much for having us on your channel. We're here to talk to you guys about kind of real-world basic rules for making sure your program is growing you muscle. So we can say hypertrophy, but we're trying to keep it a little less sciencey. We're going to take some of the scientific principles and kind of translate them into real-world application. We've got 5 kind of directions or rules to go by, and here they are. These are the foundational basics. Can it get more complex than this? Absolutely. We've made a hell of a hobby making stuff like this more complex, but fundamentally, if your hypertrophy program is working really well, it's going to do all these things right. The first one is volume. So generally speaking, there's a dose-response relationship with volume and amount of muscle you're growing. The more you train, in terms of number of sets and to some extent number of reps, the bigger you get. But that's to a point up until you can't recover anymore. Obviously, training beyond your ability to recover doesn't get you any more jacked because your body is just simply trying to heal itself at that point and not actually growing. So basically, if you want to hit the volume correctly, you've got to train somewhere in between your minimum effective volume, which is the minimum amount that it takes to actually get you more muscular, right? If you train with 1 set per week, that's definitely below that for almost everyone except for ranked beginners. And you want to train between your minimum effective volume and your maximum recoverable volume. What is that range, Jared? Give us like the most basic number of sets per week figure. And by the way, when we're talking about number of sets, we're talking about mostly sets of reps between 8 and 15 reps. What is a number of sets per week in a program that really hits that golden zone of volume for most body parts?
So whenever I'm starting off a mesocycle or when I move into a maintenance period, I'm working around that maintenance level volume, or if it's a hypertrophy phase, that minimum effective volume. And maintenance volume for me typically is in between 6 to 10 sets.
And that's just to keep your gains?
To keep the tissue around, to keep your muscle around. Minimum effective volume would be anywhere from probably, I would say 8 to 12 sets.
8 to 12 sets per body part per week. So it's like week. 10 sets of chest.
Yeah.
5 on Monday, 5 on Thursdays, just as an example.
So just starting off,
amount to get you to grow, I guess.
Let's say mesocycle, week 1, the first microcycle of the mesocycle, first week of training. I do, 8 to 10 sets per body part per week, per muscle group. And then moving forward into, your MRV, that last week of training, you're working through to MRV. I'm sitting anywhere between 15 to 20 sets per body part per week.
So on average, you're maybe somewhere between 12 and 15 sets per body part per week.
Absolutely.
That's like, so basically just real world, if you're using much less than 10 sets per week, you're probably not doing enough in most cases per body part. And if you're going way more than 25 sets per week, it's probably too much. Now there's certainly an individual variation there, but if you want to design a program that's basically effective, maybe start around 10 sets per week and see how you do. So that's for volume. Critically important because volume is a huge driver for hypertrophy, but it's not the only one. Intensity is a factor. When we say intensity, we really just mean how much weight are you lifting as a percent of your 1 rep max. Generally speaking, we're talking that anywhere above 60% of your 1 rep max is going to start to build muscle that's kind of worth your time to be doing those sets. Can you grow muscle at less than that? Yeah, for short periods, under some circumstances you can, but if you're going to train and you want the best results, anywhere between 60% of your 1RM to 75% of your 1RM is where most of your training should be. Jared, what kind of rep ranges does that usually convert to for most people?
It's going to depend on the intensities that you're using, but generally we say 7 to 15 would be around where you would put that. But obviously the higher the intensity goes, the weight on the bar, the less reps. That's going to be more in the 7 to 10 rep range rather than the 10 to 15 rep range. But when you're around those 60% intensities, probably more so the 10 to 15.
Yeah, so put it to you this way. If your program just most of the time is way above 15 reps on average per set, you're probably missing out on weights that are heavier and would grow you more. On the other hand, Jared, what kind of problem do we run into if we're trying to grow as much as we can and we're using like sets of 3 or sets of 5? Why is that bad? Because heavy weight's good, and can't you just do more sets?
Potentially, but you also have the metabolite accumulating benefits
sure.
from the higher.
And there's like a fatigue problem there, isn't there?
Yeah, for sure.
So like what would happen if you tried to just get as many sets times reps times weight in with sets of 10 versus sets of 3, and 3 is like at 85% 1RM?
Yeah, if you're using heavier intensities, and heavier intensities are going to have the higher fatigue with those heavier weights, the intensities. So if you're trying to do, 10 sets of 3 as opposed to 3 sets of 10 with 75%, then you might overreach too soon in the mesocycle, which leads to less effective training throughout the year, which you don't want.
You basically get so beat up trying to train way too heavy with a certain volume, it's better off to train in the moderate range because that's your way to accumulate the biggest volumes. If you try to train way too heavy, it works definitely, it hypertrophies you, but you won't survive the program for long. And then if you try to train too light, you'll be just fine with fatigue accumulation, but you won't be getting as much growth out of the whole process. Next one is progression. So are you just supposed to do like 12 sets every week? And are you supposed to just lift at 65% every week? Or what's going on with that? The fundamental thing about progression is the overload principle is your body gets used to a certain stimulus. Every time it gets a new stimulus, it grows to some extent. And when it grows from that, the next time you present a stimulus has to be somehow bigger, better, scarier, and that will get your body to adapt. So what's an example, Jared, of like a typical progression maybe in volume and in intensity that you think is a good idea for most people to try?
I think that generally speaking, adding a set or 10 pounds on the bar, maybe a combination of the two, is a really good start for people.
You mean like week to week?
Week to week, yeah. So let's say week 1 you're doing 3 sets of 10 reps or something like that with a certain percentage of your 1RM, like we start at that 60%, right?
So like 200 pounds, let's say.
200 pounds, let's say. And you increase that by 5% the next week, and you add a set. And you continue to do this through the mesocycle until you reach that point where the fatigue catches up to the volume that you're doing, and you have to deload.
Yep. And so the biggest lesson for progression is, and people ask us all the time, and there are good answers to this, but they're individually circumstanced. What do I push the volume in terms of number of sets? How many sets do I add? Do I push the intensity? What percentage? The question of exactly how to do it is minor compared to, does your program have a way to progress? Is one week harder than the next? If it's more sets, great. You might even be able to keep the weight the same for a while and do more sets. Can you do more reps? Potentially. Can you do more weight? Almost certainly. That's definitely a good idea. If your program is getting more challenging week to week to week, that's a really good thing. And as long as you're doing that, the details aren't so much a concern until you get to a really, really high level. So next one is frequency. Training frequency is a really big question on people's minds very often. And training frequency is the question of how often are you doing overload, hard training for a body part per week? Like do you have one quad day, that's a frequency of 1 per week? Or do you have 3 days a week where you do front squats one day, squats another day, leg presses another? That might be the same number of total sets, it might be the same volume, but you're splitting it up in different amounts. What's the general frequency range you think most people should be starting out with?
2 to 4 days per muscle group per week is probably pretty good. I think the larger that a muscle group is, the less frequent you'll be able to train that muscle group because the weight on the bar that you're using is so disrupting that you need more time to recover from that. So something like a lateral delt, a bicep, could be trained in the upper range of that 2 to 4.
So like 4 times a week?
4 times a week. I actually do 4 times a week with 2 pretty overloading sessions, 2 a little bit lighter sessions. And then for like my quads, I'll have 1 very overloading session. The other one is a lighter sort of recovery session, but it's still overloading in nature. And same thing for the large muscle groups that I have, pecs, back, stuff like that. So 2 to 3 for those larger ones, and I would say 3 to 4 for the smaller muscle groups.
Yeah, and that changes too as you get bigger throughout your lifting career. So if you start out and you weigh maybe 130 pounds, it might be optimal for you to train every muscle group 4, maybe even more times a week. People get really great results from high frequency programs, 5 and 6 days a week training for every muscle group, just as long as you spread out the volume. Remember, this isn't 5 or 6 workouts where every one of them is 20 sets. It's like 4 sets at a time, but 6 times 4 adds up to something like, 20-ish, a little bit more. So the deal with that is, as you get bigger and stronger, you may not be able to overload as frequently. So if you weigh 130 pounds, you might be able to get away with I phrased that actually a little bit wrong. It might be optimal for you to train relatively frequently, but if you are in the position where you're pushing 200 pounds, maybe a little bit more, and you're pretty strong, benching in the high threes, deadlifting in the fives, and squatting in the high fours, you're not going to be able to sustain. You can go through high frequency periods here and there, but you're not going to sustain an average frequency of 6 days a week most of the time. So you might want to pare back the big body parts to 2 or 3 times a week and keep the small ones, because you're not lateral raising 400 pounds. At least we're not. Maybe there's somebody out there. Maybe there's a crazy YouTube channel of a guy lateral raising. That'd be so sweet. So in any case, make sure that you pair the frequency to the muscle and pair the frequency to your level of strength and development. Last thing, a little bit more of an esoteric and complex concept, but we're going to try to break it down for you guys to be as simple as possible, is periodization. Fundamentally, periodization has already been kind of revealed in progression through its simplest form. Every week or so is a microcycle. You have certain weight sets, reps, etc., and you move up in volumes and intensities over the course of the mesocycle. Fatigue will accumulate throughout that time to the point where you can't progress anymore because you've basically been fatigued too much. It's like if a restaurant kitchen is making really good food, by the end of the day, there's so much garbage everywhere and unwashed silverware, etc., that because we're so busy making good food, we didn't have time to clean the kitchen, so you have to go back and do a deload phase, maybe a week of super light, or much lighter, much less volume training in order to clean the kitchen, so to speak, drop that fatigue and let your body hit another hard mesocycle. What's a typical deload recommendation? Because a lot of people will say, let's just take a week off. What do you think is a good, some people train way too hard on deload. What's a good deload week look like?
That's a good question, because I'll see, especially in the bodybuilding community, when I get clients coming in, they're like, yeah, so for my deload, or in the powerlifting community as well, they're like, I just went ahead and I lowered the weight, but I went ahead and did, some drop sets. I did a bunch of curls that I added in, stuff like that.
What does that do for volume?
It jacks the volume way up, which volume is the number one contributor to fatigue. We're trying to drop fatigue and replete substrates. Probably a bad idea to do those types of things. For my clients, for myself, Mike as well, I think that dropping the sets and the reps potentially in that first half of the deload, the first, let's say, 3 days or so of the deload, is a good idea. The last half of the deload, when your substrates are pretty repleted, your fatigue's starting to dissipate pretty well, you can go ahead and drop the intensity, the weight on the bar as well, and finish off the deload that way, because those lighter sessions, they also promote recovery. They're not just sessions to do sessions. Yeah. You're going in there, promoting recovery, repleting substrates, and that's how you deload.
Yep. So basically, if you're using 200 pounds at the end of your mesocycle for 6 sets of 10, you might do, like, in the first half of your week, 3 sets of 5 at about the same weight as the 10 weight. And 5s at a 10 weight isn't that hard. When half the sets, you're starting to really drop some fatigue. But we also want to take some of the fatigue away from joints and connective tissues, etc. So then the second half of the week is 3 by 5 at 100 pounds, which feels ridiculously easy, but what does it tend to do to your motivation to train at the end of a deload week?
Well, I can tell you from experience, from someone that has skipped some of those sessions before, that it makes you want to go train. Do not do that. It's a very bad idea, and if you do end up skipping some sessions at the end and moving into that next mesocycle, you might run into an issue later on where you have to deload even earlier in the next mesocycle because you did that. So, finish strong, go through the mental game that is deloading, and hit that next mesocycle on the ground running.
Yep. So you're constructing your mesocycles, and you're doing, up, and deload, which is really good. It gets you your hypertrophy that you're looking for, gets you muscle growth. And you're going to do that for multiple mesocycles in a row because you make gains over time. It's not like you're going to do one, 6-week training period and that'll be it. The mesocycle on average, if you progress properly and you start at the kind of the least that gets you muscle growth and you end at the most, usually most people somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks of accumulation and then 1 week of deloading. So just think of it as about a month and a half on average. And so about a month and a half of that, you can repeat that mesocycle over and over and over, but we run into a bit of a problem where the very act and process of attempted hypertrophy is getting to be a bit stale. Now the good news is we have one weapon against that, which is exercise variation. We can choose different exercises. Maybe every 2 mesocycles or so, you can do new exercises. So what's an example of that, Jared? Like how are we going to replace exercises?
It's pretty simple. There's, grip and width variations that are very effective, because you still want to try to stick to those heavier compound basics, things of that nature in the beginning of this training session. So if you can simply just move from a normal grip bench to a close grip bench, a narrow stance squat to a wide stance squat, or maybe even just a barbell bench to a dumbbell bench.
Yep. So you progress for about 3 months on one of those variants, you go up, 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 down, up, 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 and by that end of that, maybe 3 months or so, the movement's pretty stable. You're not making the kind of gains you used to be. You introduce a new movement, so if you used to incline dumbbell benching, you might switch to flat dumbbell or something like that, a little bit of different focus, different angle. You might even alter the rep range a little bit. That gets you a new ability to grow, but even that runs out after probably about half a year. You're just kind of resistant to high volume training. Your body doesn't respond the same way it used to. You might notice that from a first person perspective, as a lack of a pump, not much is happening. You don't get the same blood flow as usual from training. You might start to get really bored with training. You might get it burned out. What do we do in that case, Jared?
These are really good times to step back, and whenever we were talking about volume before, we talked about that maintenance level volume. He was talking about during periods where you're just maintaining the tissue integrity, where you would up the intensity, move into maybe the strength realm, or just...
So like sets of 5 or something.
Sets of 5 around there. You know, lower the rep, like you said, lower the rep range to maybe that 4 to 6 rep range period. And you want to back down on the total volume in the session dramatically. Just like I said, maintenance level volumes.
So like 6 to 8 sets a week.
6 to 8 sets a week. What I said in the beginning, you know, 6 right around there for each body part per week.
And how long are we going to do that for?
It's pretty good idea to run these maintenance periods anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks. I've seen. I do a 3-to-1 paradigm myself whenever I'm moving from massing to maintenance before a big diet phase. I'll do that 3-to-1 paradigm to really maintain that tissue integrity, resensitize everything in my body, so that way I'm ready for the diet, ready for more growth stimulus.
3-to-1 paradigm means basically a month, 3 weeks up, 1 week down.
3 weeks up, 1
yeah,
week
and then up means just an intensity. You're not adding sets at this point because we don't want high volumes. We want to get our body so unused to high volumes that when we come back, we still have all our muscle because the heavy weights have preserved it. They haven't grown any now, so it's psychologically a strange time because you're not going to be able to grow new muscle. But what you're doing is you're priming yourself to grow new muscle for months and months after, or keep muscle on if you're going to go into a diet phase. The easiest analogy I have for this maintenance phase is the weekend. You want to be super productive at work, but if you work 7 days a week, weeks on end, you're going to burn out sooner or later. So if you're really, really prone to be a just SpongeBob kind of really good worker, and that's your #1 goal, the weekend is actually a good idea because it resets you, recalibrates you, drops the fatigue so that you're ready to be a hard worker again on Monday.
We actually have a podcast that we did with Steve Hall. I remember that. We talked very in depth about this and how you feel psychologically from like I'm a professional natural bodybuilder and come from a perspective like that where we love that high volume training, and all you guys probably love
all the pumps and stuff.
We love it. And whenever we start to see that acute hypertrophy or that swelling from the hypertrophy that starts to go down as we move into the lower volumes, we start freaking out. We're like, we're losing muscle. Oh God, what do I do? And we want to just go get a pump. But you got to really try not to do that and just go through with the maintenance period, kind of like the deload. You just got to stick it out, go through it, and you will absolutely have more productive training for the rest of the year.
Yep, and the podcast Jared's referring to is the Revive Stronger Macros Bodybuilding and Powerlifting podcast. Correct. Steve Hall runs it. Google some of those names. You're going to get really good stuff. Jared and I there all the time answering a bunch of questions, talking about deep training theory and application. That's about it, huh? Yeah. Folks, thanks so much for joining in. Hopefully you can put this into practice and get more jacked, which I've been told is the meaning of life.
Well, guys, that is all the time we have. My thanks to Dr. Mike Israetel for doing this video. If you liked the video, make sure to like the damn video. I'm also going to link all his social media in the description. Make sure to check out, he has something called Renaissance Periodization. If you're interested in trying to build size, build muscle, also get help with your nutrition, I highly recommend it. He's extremely knowledgeable. Check that in the description, and I'll be seeing all you guys, my rascals, in that next video. Peace.